As someone who has always loved the peaceful beauty of Rivendell, one question has haunted me since finishing The Lord of the Rings. What happened to that sacred valley after Elrond and his people sailed west? Rivendell was more than just a beautiful location. It was the last homely house, a refuge of ancient wisdom and healing. But when the elves departed Middle-earth, they left behind their homes, their halls, and thousands of years of history. So what became of Rivendell? Did it fall into ruin? Was it abandoned to the wilderness? Or did something else happen? That's what we'll investigate in this video. Let's start with what Tolkien actually tells us about the departure of the elves from Rivendell. At the end of The Return of the King, we witness a pivotal moment. Elrond, who had dwelt in Rivendell for over 4,000 years, makes the decision to leave Middle-earth. He had held one of the 3 elven rings, Vilya, the mightiest of them, and with the destruction of the One Ring, the power of all the rings was ending. Here's what Tolkien writes. In the twilight of autumn, it sailed out of Mithlond, until the seas of the Bent World fell away beneath it, and the winds of the round sky troubled it no more, and borne upon the high airs above the mists of the world, it passed into the ancient west. Elrond sailed from the Grey Havens, along with Gandalf, Galadriel, Frodo, and Bilbo. But he didn't take everyone with him. Many elves of Rivendell chose to remain in Middle-earth, at least for a time. This is crucial. The departure of the elves wasn't a single moment when everyone vanished. It was a gradual fading, a slow exodus that took place over many years. The appendices of The Return of the King give us important details about what happened next. After Elrond's departure, his sons, Elladan and Elrohir, remained in Rivendell. These were the twin sons of Elrond, mighty warriors who had fought alongside the Dunedain for centuries. They had a choice: sail west with their father, or remain in Middle-earth. They chose to stay. Why would they stay? The text hints that they were waiting for their sister Arwen. She had chosen mortality by marrying Aragorn, giving up her immortal life to remain with the man she loved. When Aragorn died after ruling for 120 years, Arwen's grief was absolute. The appendices tell us she left Minas Tirith and travelled north to Lothlorien, where she had spent her youth with Galadriel. There, in the now empty forest, she laid down her life. But there's another reason Elladan and Elrohir may have stayed. Throughout their long lives, they had been dedicated to fighting the forces of darkness, particularly the orcs who had tormented their mother centuries before. With Sauron defeated, but evil not entirely gone from the world, they may have chosen to remain as guardians and protectors for as long as they were needed. So Rivendell wasn't immediately abandoned. For decades, perhaps even a century or more, some elves remained. The halls weren't empty yet. But what about the physical place itself? What made Rivendell special, and what happened to that? Rivendell's power came from multiple sources. First, it was hidden by the natural geography of the valley and by the magic of Elrond's ring, Vilya. The house was difficult to find, unless you knew the way or were guided there. Second, it was protected by Elrond's wisdom and the presence of many powerful elves. Third, and most importantly, it was sustained by Vilya itself. As Elrond explains during the council, that is the purpose for which the elves still dwell in Middle-earth, to preserve the memory of ancient days, and to hold back, as long as they can, the march of time. The 3 rings had the power to preserve, to hold back decay and corruption, to keep places beautiful and timeless. Rivendell, Lothlorien, and the Grey Havens were all sustained by this magic. But when the One Ring was destroyed, the power of the three rings ended. This didn't cause immediate catastrophic change, but it meant these places would no longer be protected from the passage of time. What does this mean, practically? Without the power of Vilja, Rivendell would begin to age naturally. The trees would grow wild without the elves to tend them. The buildings would slowly weather and decay. The magic that made it a place of healing and refuge would fade. It wouldn't happen overnight. Elven craftwork was built to last. But gradually, over years and decades, Rivendell would become just another valley in the wilderness. There's also the question of whether men ever claimed Rivendell. The kingdom of Arnor, which had long been allied with the Elves, was being rebuilt under King Aragorn's authority. Aragorn himself had been raised in Rivendell and loved it deeply. He would never have allowed it to be despoiled or destroyed. But did he send men to inhabit it? Did it become part of his northern kingdom? The texts don't tell us explicitly, but there are clues. Tolkien indicates that the lands of Eriador, the region containing Rivendell, came back under the protection of the reunited kingdom. Aragorn re-established the northern realm and brought order to lands that had been wild and dangerous for centuries. It's reasonable to assume that Rivendell, as a place of historical significance and as his childhood home, received special attention. But here's what I think is most likely. Rivendell was never resettled by men. It was too sacred, too closely associated with the elves and their passing. Instead, it probably became a protected memorial, a place that was guarded but left largely as it was. Perhaps the Dunedain, the Rangers of the North, who had always been allied with Elrond, continued to watch over it, ensuring no harm came to the valley, even as nature slowly reclaimed it. In one of his letters, Tolkien addresses the fate of the elven realms. He indicates that places like Rivendell and Lothlorien would eventually fade into legend and memory, becoming the stuff of fairy tales that men would tell in later ages. The actual locations might remain, but their magic and wonder would be lost, known only to a few who remembered the ancient days. There's something profoundly melancholic about this. Rivendell, which had stood as a beacon of light and wisdom for thousands of years, which had sheltered the ring-bearer and housed the council that decided the fate of Middle-earth, would eventually be forgotten by most. The halls where Bilbo wrote his poetry and Aragorn courted Arwen would fall silent. The library containing the ancient lore of the elves would gather dust or be lost entirely. Yet there's also a certain rightness to it. The elves were leaving Middle-earth because it was becoming the dominion of men. Their time was ending, and with it, the magic and wonder they had brought to the world. Rivendell fading away is part of that larger pattern, the inevitable passage from the mythical to the mundane, from the age of legends to the age of history. But I don't think Rivendell was ever truly destroyed or lost. Even in ruin, even overgrown and forgotten, the valley would retain some echo of its former beauty. The location itself, the waterfalls, the forests, the hidden refuge in the mountains, would remain. Travelers passing through might sense something special about the place, without understanding why. The magic might be gone, but the memory would linger. Tolkien was writing about the end of an age, about the sorrow of watching beautiful things pass away. Rivendell's fate after the elves left is part of that theme. It reminds us that nothing lasts forever, that even the most wonderful places and times must eventually end. But it also suggests that something of value remains, in memory, in story, in the land itself. The last we hear of Rivendell in the primary texts is that Elladan and Elrohir eventually did sail west, though Tolkien doesn't tell us exactly when. Perhaps they stayed until Arwen's death, then finally left Middle-earth to rejoin their father. When they departed, taking with them any remaining elves, Rivendell would have been truly abandoned. But here's something beautiful to consider. In Valinor, in the Undying Lands, Elrond and his household would remember Rivendell perfectly. They would remember every detail: the sound of the waterfalls, the songs sung in the Hall of Fire, the garden where Arwen walked. In the realm beyond the circles of the world, Rivendell would live on in memory, preserved perfectly by those who loved it. So what happened to Rivendell after the elves left? It slowly returned to nature, protected but not inhabited, honored but not preserved artificially. It became a memorial to the age that had passed, a beautiful ruin that the Dunedain guarded and eventually forgot. The buildings weathered, the gardens grew wild, and the magic faded. But the valley remained, waiting in silence, holding the memory of the elves in its very stones. If you enjoyed this exploration of Rivendell's fate, please subscribe for more Middle-earth lore. Leave a like if this gave you a new perspective on the passing of the elves, and tell me in the comments, would you have wanted Rivendell to be preserved forever, or is there beauty in letting it fade naturally? Take care, and see you in the next one.